So now we already divided the board into 4 sections. The king side, white's king side, black's king side, black's queen side, white's queen side. Okay, we're doing really, really good. Have you ever heard the expression, the chess center? The chess center. You put your pieces in the center of the chessboard because that's where they're most effective. Well, we say that there are 16 squares in the center, okay? These squares right here, these squares make the center. So this is a center square, D4, E4 is a center square. Is F6 a center square? Yes. C6 is a center square? F3? G3? No. Okay. So when I was a kid and I started playing chess, man, did I lose so many games. I got beat so bad I didn't even know what a draw was. I didn't even think a draw was possible. I just kept losing, losing, losing. And then I came across a book. The book was called How to Open a Chess Game. And I thought, this is perfect for me, because I didn't know how to open a chess game. And the book was written by 12 grandmasters, the very best players all over the world, 12 different authors. And each and every one of those authors had their own approach to the opening. But you know, I read each one, and they each had a different opinion, but in fact they didn't. They all said the same thing. They said there are 3 things, and only 3 things that you need to do to open a chess game well. The first thing they said was you have to fight for your fair share of the center, which means that you had to do your best to try to control these 16 squares in the opening. That was their first principle. Their second principle was that you needed to develop your pieces to good squares. That was principle number 2. Okay. And the third principle, and it was very important, was that you needed a safe king. Okay? That was all you needed to do, was control the center, develop your pieces to effective squares, and a safe king. That's all of our goals. So I started, this was like, wow! Now I understood what you know what I used to do? In my imagination, when I was a kid, I thought of my rooks, because I was the general, remember, I thought that my rooks were cannons. Ooh, those are pretty powerful pieces. And I thought of my knights as cavalry. And I thought of my bishops as archers. And I thought my king was weak. He always got checkmated, so of course he was terrible. And the queen, well, she was just my favorite. But when I started, I didn't realize that the queen was going to be my favorite piece. I thought the rooks were really good, so I used to start like this. H4. That was my opening move. Does that control the center? Not even close, right? You know what my opponents did? Because they knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring my cannons out. They would play D5. You know what I did? Developing my cannon. Is that a good move? That's a terrible move, right? You know what my opponents would do? They take my rooks. They took my rooks. And I was like, oh, I hate that when they do that. Well, now, I was very clever. I didn't take his archer. No. I had to develop my other cannon. I played here. Do you know what my opponents would do? Now, they should retreat the bishop. They should go away with the bishop, and they'd be a rook ahead. They would play here. And you know what I did? Yes! I developed my cannon. You know what they did? They took the rook. I mean, it was like they didn't miss a trick. You know, they would take I'd lose my rooks right off the bat. So you know I was a terrible, terrible player. So if this was my early start to chess, you could see why I lost every game I played, right? So it was a revelation. It was a revelation to me that I should learn to control the center. So I came up with what I called my fortress position. And the fortress position, I started as white with this move, knight f3. Is this a good move? Yeah, because it controls the center. It develops a piece off the back rank. We can think of our back rank as the barracks. Okay, all of our soldiers are at the barracks, and you got to mobilize them and bring them into the battle. So knight g1 f3 is a good starting move because it mobilizes your pieces off the back rank and it controls the center. It didn't really matter what my opponent played. If my opponent played this, I would take his pawn, so that mattered. But if my opponent played this move or this move or this move, showing how clever he is, right, to copy me, I didn't mind. So let's just say my opponent played this move. Is this good move? It controls the center, so that's a pretty good move. And then what I did is I did this. What do we call this when we put our bishop? Yes? Fianchetto the bishop. I loved to fianchetto the bishop. And it really didn't matter what my opponent did. I would put my bishop on the long diagonal. And it really didn't matter what my opponent did. I castled. Okay? And this is what I called building a fortress. So in the first place, this bishop is a loyal defender. I kind of thought of my bishop as my royal guard. So my king is royalty, and the bishop defends my king. And this formation I called a fortress because it was very hard for me to get checkmated. I lost, instead of losing in 5, 10, or 20 moves, I lost in 40 moves, 30, 50 moves. That was good. I was getting better by having a safety for my king. So the first principle was to control the center. Second principle, put your pieces on good squares. Third principle, a safe king. So this met the criteria of my pieces and safe king. Now, only now, once my king was in safety, did I turn my attention to controlling the center. So, for example, I also thought of my bishop as an archer in ambush, right? It's just waiting for something good to happen on this diagonal. So in this position, let's imagine that black plays d5. Is this a good move? Yes, it's an excellent move. Black is doing pretty good. He's occupying the center. This pawn on d5 controls e4 and c4. This pawn on c5 controls what square in the center? b4? b4? d4, correct. This knight controls what two squares in the center? And this knight on f6 controls what two squares in the center? Come on, I didn't hear an answer. d5 and e4. Okay, so my opponent is actually opening his position very well. He's controlling the center. He's also occupying the center, and he's developed his knights to good squares. So now it's my turn to attack in the center, and I would play this move. d4. Is this a good move in terms of occupying the center? Yes, because it's a move in the center, and my opponent would take my pawn, I would take his pawn, and my opponent would play e5, attacking my knight. So what would I do? Young man, what would I do? Knight takes c6. That's exactly what I would do. Correct. B takes c6. So my opponent has played really very well. He's occupying the center. His knight's on a good square. Is his king in safety? Not yet. Not yet. And my bishop is on a pretty good diagonal, correct? It's on the long diagonal. But this pawn on d5, how is that pawn protected? By the c6 pawn? By the f6? And I attack that pawn with my bishop and my queen. Is there a way I could attack this pawn some more? Young man, what would I do?
White knight on c3.
That's one move. But if I bring my knight out right away, I can't really take this pawn with my knight because the pawn protects it. So what I would try to do is I'd play c4. Does this move play in the center? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And my opponent, what would happen if he advanced his pawn? What?
Bishop takes c6.
Oh, I was so happy about that. That bishop, remember I was telling you it was lurking in an ambush? Bishop takes c6, check. I'd win a pawn. And what happened if he defended his check? What next?
Bishop takes a8.
Yes, because now at this time in my career, I was beginning to think that the cannons always got captured by bishops. And now it's true. We can see it's true. So let's go back to this moment. I have just played the move c2, c4, and my opponent would play bishop e7. Okay? Now what could I do? How can I increase the pressure on the d5 pawn? How? Knight to c3. You guys are guessing my moves. And once you know that you should be playing in the center, that you should be developing your pieces to good squares, a lot of these moves start to come naturally. They weren't natural for me when I was starting. Everything was really, really hard and difficult. But once I understood the principle of playing in the center, putting your pieces on good squares, and king safety, my play, I went from like 0 to like 1,000. Like just vroom, straight up. It was an elevator ride to the top. I didn't even think about 1,200. That was just too high. So, if my opponent advances, what am I going to do? I'm going to snap that pawn with check. So my opponent would defend his pawn on d5 with his bishop. Was that a good move? That's an excellent move. He's developing his army, and he's centralized his bishop, and he's protecting his pawn. Now I cannot take, because in the end I'm going to lose. He's got that pawn defended more times than I can attack it. How can I attack his pawn some more? How?
e4.
e4? Okay. But if I played this move, I have a problem. What happens to that beautiful bishop? I block my bishop. It gets blocked. Darn. And he could move, and I can't play bishop takes anymore. So I shouldn't block my bishop, but how can I pressure this pawn some more? Does this knight defend this pawn?
Yes.
Yes. Can I attack his knight?
Yes.
How could I attack his knight?
Bishop
Right. Developing my bishop, attacking his knight, which is defending his pawn. If black advances this pawn, nothing changed. I just jump on that c6 pawn, right? Okay, so what happens if my opponent, at last, my opponent's been a little bit slow, but he's brought his king into safety. But now, can I win material? Can I? Yes, what should I do?
Bishop takes f6.
Okay, bishop takes f6. What happens if he takes back?
C takes d5.
Correct. And what happens if he recaptures? C takes d5?
Knight takes d5.
Right. Because now I have more attackers than he has defenders. If he takes my
Bishop takes d5.
bishop takes d5, and I've won a pawn. So this turned out to be a very, very good opening for me. So I really liked creating a fortress. And I really started paying attention to the center and developing my pieces in the center. I got to be pretty good with white. Yes. I even made a draw or two. Yes. That was really, really good. And then I started to think that if the fortress variation worked so well for me when I was white, maybe I could use the same setup for when I was black. So I wanted a fortress. I kind of thought of my fortress position as the universal medicine. It's good against every opening. Okay? So, we're going to go back to the starting position. So now we have to imagine that I'm playing the black pieces, and you know what I want to do. I want to have my knight here, my pawn here, my bishop here, and my king here. Once I got my king to safety, then I would turn my attention to the center, okay? Because my pieces are on good squares, play for the center, and I develop them later, but I was really worried about my king's safety. So, whenever my opponent opened up knight here, for example, I play knight here, and I'm on my way to a safe king. If my opponent opened with his pawn to if he opened pawn to d4, I played knight here. Sometimes my opponent would play this, and he would occupy the center. But I have king safety, and then I would play from there. Oftentimes my opponent, for example, played knight here, and I put my pawn in the center. I'd lose a lot of games, but I'd have a safe king for a long, long while. Okay, so nothing bothered me. My fortress worked miracles, except for one move. My problem when I had the black pieces and I was starting playing chess was when my opponent opened with this move. How many of you play e4? e2, e4. That move was the problem child in my fortress creation. Why? Because if I tried to play the fortress, he would attack my knight and chase it away. Darn, I hated that. So I got to be clever. I started with this move as my first move, so that if he played d4, I could play my fortress variation. And I was a happy camper. I was a happy camper for a long, long, long time until somebody discovered a move that really, really hurt. They would play f4. This is called the Austrian attack, by the way. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't. All I knew is that he put the pawns right up there on d4, e4, and f4. I played my fortress variation, bishop g7. My opponent played knight f3. Got my fortress, yay. And then I was really shocked when my opponent played e5. Why didn't I like that move e5? Why?
It blocked the wrong diagonal.
It does indeed. That's correct. There was something else that really bugged me. It attacked my knight. I'd have to move my knight, and I wouldn't have a good guard for my royal palace. If I played this move, if I moved my knight away, because you know what my opponents did? They used their cannons against me. They would play h4, immediately attacking my king, now that they've driven my knight away. I thought that the best way to deal with that attack was to attack in the center. Look at all of these pawns. Wow, that's wild, isn't it? Well, they would continue to attack me. h5. I take the pawn on d4. They take with the queen. I bring my knight to c6. This is a really good move. Why is this a real good move? Why?
It attacks the queen.
So I get to develop with a gain of tempo. I love doing that, developing my pieces with a gain of tempo. My opponent would retreat his queen. You know what I do? I capture a pawn. So I thought I was doing real well here until my opponent played takes. Now look at what's happening with my king. My king's coming up into attack. And remember one of our key principles. We want safety for our king. If I take with this pawn, what do? I weaken this diagonal, which encourages white to do what? What?
Bishop to c4 check.
Developing with a tempo. Bishop to c4 check. And if the king goes into the corner, you see that cannon? Haven't I moved into the range of the rook on h1? What could white do? Do you see it? What could white do?
Queen to h4.
Excellent move. Queen to h4 makes a double attack against the pawn on h7. Since my knight isn't on f6 to defend the pawn on h7, I'm in trouble. But even as good as a move as that is, and it's very good, white had a devastating sacrifice. Can you see the devastating sacrifice? Ooh. The first time this was played against me, I was like, oh, I was in shock. I needed hospital care. What could he do? What can he do? White has a devastating sacrifice. Queen h4 is a winning move, but white has something even more forceful. More forceful. Can he sacrifice a rook? Let's see what happens. Rook takes h7 check. This is what we call a double exclamation mark move. When I say a double exclamation mark move, what does that mean? Yes, young man. Really good. We even say brilliant. Brilliant. I had no choice. I have to take his rook with my king, which exposes me to two checks. I could check with the queen, or yes, young man. Knight g5 check. And if I move my king, young man, Queen h4. Oh, I just got killed. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to this situation. Do you remember this situation a moment ago? We were here, and I have just taken this pawn. I beg your pardon. And let's say after takes, a moment ago, I took with the f7 pawn, and I fell into that bishop c4 check and that devastating rook sacrifice. This time, let me take with this pawn. And now, how can white attack my king? How can white attack my king? Yes, young man.
Queen to h4.
You bet. Queen to h4. And now, I was really afraid of checkmate. And I saw that if my knight tried to guard the checkmate, he would recapture the pawn on e5, and my knight would have to move again. So I moved my rook to e8 to make room for my king. And now, what did white do? What did white do? Good, 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 good. A pattern to remember. It happens a lot, this pattern. You're going to love it. Can I show you? I'm anxious to show you. Check. I only have one move. King f8. Now remember what I was saying about my archer and how he was my royal guard, a loyal and royal guard? My best defender is the bishop, correct? Correct. My opponent would capture my pawn on e5 with what idea in mind? Is this bishop on c1 working? No, it's sleeping. It's sleeping in its barracks. But now this bishop wants to come alive. Where will this bishop go next? Where?
h6.
h6 to get rid of my royal guard. So you know what I did? I thought I was so clever. I took with my knight on e5. What did my opponent do? Yes?
Bishop to h6.
You bet. Bishop to h6. The best defending piece of my king is my bishop. So with this bishop move, white is trying to get rid of this bishop. Now I saw that if I take the bishop, I will get checkmated. How? How? How?
Queen takes h6 check.
Correct. And then,
King d8.
yes?
Queen h8 checkmate.
Queen h8 checkmate. That's very nice. The rook supports the queen. However, what was very interesting is you did it in two moves. Can you give a checkmate in one? Yeah?
Queen to h8 checkmate.
Yes. Oh, that's terrible. But I saw that. Oh boy, was I clever. I was so clever. I saw that if I took on h6, queen h8 checkmate, or queen takes h6 check, and checkmate on the next turn. But I had a defense. I had a real good defense too. I took the knight and said, check. And I was very proud that I could check my opponent's king. He took my knight, and check this out. You're going to be amazed at my defensive prowess. I played queen to d4 with the idea to protect my bishop. So I'm hoping he will trade bishops. I'll recapture with the queen, and I'll have stopped the attack. You got to give me credit, right? Applause. Really, okay, that was really, real good. My opponent checkmated me in one move. How did he do that? How did my opponent checkmate me in one move? I was shocked. I needed hospital care. Again. Do you see the move? Do you see the move? Well, let's put it another way. This bishop on G7 protects this square, correct? Except for one small tiny detail. That bishop is in a pin.
Queen to H8.
Checkmate. Ah, I was devastated. Mom asked Yasser, Yasser, how did you do? You know what Yasser had to say? I got checkmated on the king side. He said, when are you going to stop getting checkmated on the king side? I don't know, but I'm working on it. Okay, so we have to go back to the very, very start. I lost so many games with my fortress variation when I was black because I kept getting checkmated on the king side because my knight that was supposed to be guarding my king was forever getting chased away by my opponent's pawn. What I mean to say was in this position, when my opponent played e4, I dreaded, I wanted my fortress position, but I dreaded that the pawn would come to e5. So I had to be clever. I had to think, how am I going to get my fortress variation? And I've got to stop the pawn from coming to e5. Well, as we saw a moment ago, when white had the pawn on d4, it was supporting the pawn on e5. I had a solution. The solution was not to let white put a pawn on d4. So what I did is I played c5. This is what was called the Sicilian defense. I didn't know that, by the way. My opponent would play knight f3. I would play knight c6. My opponent would play d4. I would take the pawn on d4. My opponent would recapture. Now again, I didn't know what this variation was called. I just knew I wanted my fortress. Okay? How do I get my fortress set up? So I was very happy to get rid of this pawn because I knew that once white got a pawn on d4, that pawn on d4 fortified his advance e5. And I've stopped it before it happened. Now I would play g6. My opponents would play knight c3. I would play bishop g7. My opponents would play bishop e3. I would play knight f6. My opponents would play some move here. I'm not even too sure what my opponents... Maybe they developed their bishop. I'm not sure. They could develop their bishop all kinds of ways. And now I had the fortress without having to worry about the pawn advancing and disturbing my king. Later, some really good chess experts, you know, the guys with the 2000 ratings, I mean, they were gods. They said to me, Yasser, you're playing the accelerated dragon variation. I was, yes! Anything that was the dragon, I was happy with. Accelerated dragon, boy, you just call me young dragon, and you know, you got the idea. So I was really pleased that I had fallen upon this discovery of getting a fortress position. By the way, in this position, have I done well? Have I controlled the center? My knight, are they on good squares?
Yes.
My bishop is good, my rook is good, yes. Is my king in safety? Yes. So now I could turn my attention to the center. If they did this move, castles, it's like respect. My opponent's very good. He's put his king in safety as well. Now I can turn to the center. And I could play a move like this, attacking in the center. Okay? At this moment, black has 3 pieces that are sleeping. 3 pieces in black's position are sleeping. Can you tell me what 3 pieces they are? Yes, young man.
The queen, the bishop, and the rook.
The queen on d8, the bishop on c8, and the rook on a8. They're sleeping because they haven't moved. So with this move, d5 takes, 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 takes. My queen's no longer sleeping. She's in battle. My bishop is getting ready to come out, and as soon as my bishop comes out, this rook will come out. I did well. I lost him another 25 moves, but at least from the opening I did well. So the whole thing about this class is 3 things. In the opening, you want to play for control of the center. Principle number 1. Principle number 2, you need good squares for your pieces, and you need a safe king. You do that, you're on your way to losing lots of games. But you'll be in a fight. Your opponent won't checkmate you in 5 moves like, like you've seen me get checkmated.